Genesis 37:50 tells us the story of Joseph and his brothers. In the Bible, the story of Joseph and his brothers tells of how Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers in Egypt, eventually rising to a powerful position in the Egyptian government, and later forgiving his brothers when they came to Egypt seeking food during a famine, ultimately reuniting with his family after years of separation. This narrative is primarily found in the book of Genesis, chapters 37 to 50. Some key points of the story include Jacob's favoritism. Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons, giving him a special coat of many colors, which fueled jealousy among his brothers. Joseph's dreams. Joseph had dreams that he would one day rule over his brothers, further exacerbating their resentment, betrayal, and sale. When Joseph went to check on his brothers while they were tending sheep, they plotted to kill him, but instead threw him into a pit and sold him as a slave to Midianite traders who took him to Egypt. Life in Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, a high-ranking official, but was later falsely accused of adultery by Potiphar's wife and imprisoned, interpreting dreams. While in prison, Joseph demonstrated his ability to interpret dreams by correctly explaining the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, rise to power. Due to his dream interpretation skills, Joseph was called upon to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, predicting a period of great abundance followed by severe famine. This led to Pharaoh appointing Joseph as the ruler of Egypt, responsible for managing the food supply. Reunion with family. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to buy food, not recognizing him. Joseph tested them to see if they had changed, and eventually revealed his identity, forgiving them for their past actions. Important themes of the story include forgiveness. Despite the great wrong done to him, Joseph chose to forgive his brothers, demonstrating compassion and mercy, God's providence. The story highlights how even in difficult circumstances, God can work through events to bring about a greater good. Consequences of jealousy. The story serves as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of jealousy and envy. We will first break this down by verse. This story takes up approximately 1/4 of the book of Genesis. It is certain this story can be shared with many people. Later, we will talk about who should hear this story and its summary. Genesis 37 tells the story of Joseph's dreams and the betrayal of his brothers. 37, 1-4 Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, is hated by his brothers. 37, 5-11 Joseph has 2 prophetic dreams foretelling his future leadership over his family. 37, 12-24. His brothers conspire against him and throw him into a pit. 37, 25-28. Joseph is sold to Ishmaelite traders who take him to Egypt. 37, 29-36. The brothers deceive Jacob by showing him Joseph's coat covered in goat's blood, making him believe Joseph is dead. In Genesis 38, we learn of Judah and Tamar. 38, 1-11, Judah's sons and their failures, leading to Tamar's deception. 38, 12-30, Tamar tricks Judah into sleeping with her and bears twin sons, Perez and Zerah. Genesis 39 and 41 finds Joseph in Egypt with his stories of trials and success. 39, 1-6, Joseph prospers in Potiphar's house as a trusted servant. 39, 7-20, Potiphar's wife falsely accuses Joseph, and he is imprisoned. 39, 21-23, God grants Joseph favor in prison, where he interprets dreams. 40, 1-23, Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. 41, 1-36, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams about 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. 41, 37-57, Pharaoh appoints Joseph as second in command over Egypt. In Genesis 42-45, Joseph's brothers come to Egypt as a result of Jacob learning of Egypt's food supply. 42, 1-38. The brothers go to Egypt for food, but Joseph recognizes them and tests them by keeping Simeon and demanding they bring Benjamin. 43, 1-34, the brothers return with Benjamin. Joseph shows them kindness. 44, 1-34, Joseph tests them further by placing his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. 45, 1-28, Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers and forgives them, urging them to bring Jacob to Egypt. In Genesis 46 through 47, we learn of Joseph's father, Jacob's journey to Egypt. 46, 1-27, Jacob and his family move to Egypt. God reassures him. 46, 28-34, Joseph reunites with Jacob. 47, 1-12, Pharaoh grants Jacob's family the land of Goshen. 47, 13-31. Joseph manages the famine, acquiring land for Pharaoh. In Genesis 48 through 50, the story comes to a close with Jacob's final blessings and death. 48, 1-22, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons Ephraim and Manasseh. 49, 1-28, Jacob blesses his 12 sons, prophesying their futures. 49, 29-33, Jacob's death and instructions for burial in Canaan. 51-14, Jacob's funeral and burial in the cave of Machpelah. 50, 15-21. Joseph reassures his brothers of his forgiveness, stating, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50, verse 20. 50, 22-26, Joseph's final years and his request to have his bones taken to Promised Land when Israel leaves Egypt. The story of Joseph and his brothers in Genesis shows how God works through suffering to fulfill his purposes, leading to the preservation of Jacob's family and setting the stage for the Exodus. We must ask ourselves at least 4 questions about the story of Joseph and his brothers. What do you like about the story? What do you not like about this story? What does this story tell you about God? Who will you tell this story to? Our first question: what do we like about the story? I really like the story of Joseph because it's a powerful example of resilience, forgiveness, and divine providence. Here are a few things that stand out to me. First, Joseph's unshakable faith. Even though he goes through betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment, Joseph never loses faith in God. He doesn't become bitter, but keeps trusting that God has a plan for him. Second, the ultimate redemption arc. Joseph's journey is one of the greatest comeback stories. He starts as a favored but naive young man, falls into slavery, rises in Potiphar's house, gets falsely accused and imprisoned, and then ascends to become the second most powerful man in Egypt. It's a story of God turning suffering into purpose. Third, the power of forgiveness. Despite everything his brothers did to him, Joseph doesn't seek revenge. Instead, he forgives them and even reassures them with the famous line, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50, verse 20. That's such a profound perspective on hardship, seeing how even painful moments can serve a greater good. Fourth, God's sovereignty and providence. The whole story shows how God can take the worst situations and turn them into something incredible. Joseph's suffering wasn't wasted. It was all leading to a purpose, saving countless lives during the famine. Fifth, the emotional reunion. The moment Joseph reveals himself to his brothers is so moving. You can feel the tension, shock, and then the overwhelming relief and love. It's one of the most dramatic and heartfelt moments in the Bible. Sixth, the theme of dreams and destiny. Joseph's dreams as a teenager seemed impossible, but they came true in a way no one expected. It's a reminder that sometimes God's plans unfold in ways we don't understand until much later. The next question we ask ourselves is, what might we say that we do not like about this story? This is an interesting question. While I love the overall message of the story, there are definitely some aspects that are difficult or frustrating. Here are a few things that stand out. First, the cruelty of Joseph's brothers. The way his brothers treat him is brutal, first throwing him into a pit, then selling him into slavery and lying to their father for years. Even though it all works out in the end, it's hard to see that level of jealousy and betrayal within a family. Second, the suffering Joseph endures. While his story ends well, Joseph goes through so much hardship, sold as a slave, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison, and forgotten for years. It makes me wonder what he must have felt in those moments of uncertainty, not knowing how things would turn out. Third, the test with Benjamin. Joseph's decision to test his brothers by framing Benjamin for theft is a bit uncomfortable. While it does reveal their change of heart, it also puts their father Jacob through more distress. He had already lost Joseph, or so he thought, and now he nearly loses Benjamin too. It feels like an emotionally intense way to prove a point. Fourth, Jacob's favoritism. Jacob's clear favoritism toward Joseph and later Benjamin plays a big role in the family dysfunction. It's understandable why his brothers were resentful, though their reaction was extreme. This favoritism continues when Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, giving Ephraim the greater blessing over Manasseh, despite birth order. It kind of repeats the cycle of family tension. Fifth, the fate of the Egyptians. During the famine, Joseph's economic policies help Egypt survive, but they also result in the people giving up their land and becoming servants to Pharaoh in Genesis 47, verses 13 to 26. While it benefits the royal family, it raises questions about fairness. Did Joseph's plan make life harder for ordinary Egyptians in the long run? Sixth, the silence on Potiphar's wife. After falsely accusing Joseph, Potiphar's wife just disappears from the story. There's no justice or consequence for her actions, which feels a bit unresolved. Seventh, the long years of deception. Joseph's brothers let their father, Jacob, grieve for decades without telling him the truth. That's painful to think about. Even after they see how devastated he is, they never confess until circumstances force them to. Even with these difficult parts, the story as a whole is still powerful and meaningful. We may still ask ourselves if any of these things bother us, or do we see them differently? Third question to ask ourselves, what does this story tell you about God? The story of Joseph in Genesis 37 to 50 reveals a lot about God's nature and how he works in the lives of his people. Here are some key takeaways about God from this story. First, God's sovereignty. He is in control even when life seems chaotic. Even though Joseph's life takes unexpected and painful turns, everything happens according to a bigger plan. What looks like a series of unfortunate events, betrayal, slavery, false accusations, imprisonment, is actually God orchestrating events to save many lives. Genesis 50 verse 20 sums it up beautifully. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. This shows that even human wrongdoing can't stop God's ultimate plan. Second, God works through suffering. Trials often have a greater purpose. Joseph's hardships refined him and prepare him for leadership. While it's painful, suffering is not meaningless. God uses it for a purpose, even if we don't see it right away. This is a reminder that our struggles might be part of something bigger than ourselves. Third, God is faithful. He keeps his promises, even when they take time to unfold. Joseph had dreams of greatness as a teenager, but they didn't come true right away. Instead, he had to endure years of hardship before seeing them fulfilled. This shows that God's timing is different from ours, but his promises always come to pass. Fourth, God transforms people. He changes hearts over time. Joseph's brothers start off as jealous, cruel men, but over the years they regret their actions and show true repentance. Judah, in particular, goes from selling Joseph into slavery to offering himself as a substitute for Benjamin in Genesis 44, verse 33. That's a major transformation. This shows that God can change even the hardest hearts and restore broken relationships. Fifth, God is a God of redemption. He brings restoration and healing. Joseph's story isn't just about survival, it's about reconciliation. Instead of punishing his brothers, Joseph forgives them and provides for them. This foreshadows how God forgives us, even when we don't deserve it. Sixth, God's plans are bigger than ours. He sees the full picture when we don't. Joseph couldn't have known that his suffering would lead to him saving not just Egypt, but his own family, preserving the line of Israel. Sometimes we only understand God's plan in hindsight. Seventh, God provides. Even in famine, he makes a way. The famine could have wiped out Jacob's family, but through Joseph, God provided food, land, and safety. This echoes how God always provides for his people, even in the hardest seasons. In conclusion, the story of Joseph shows that God is always working, even in pain, betrayal, and waiting. He is faithful, he redeems broken situations, and he can use even the worst circumstances for good. What about you? What does this story tell you about God? Who will you tell this story to? If I had the chance, I'd share Joseph's story with people going through hard times. Anyone facing difficulties, whether it's betrayal, loss, or uncertainty, could find encouragement in Joseph's journey. His story reminds us that God is working even when we can't see it. We would share the story with someone struggling to forgive. Joseph's ability to forgive his brothers is powerful. If someone is holding on to past hurt, this story shows that forgiveness brings freedom, and what others meant for harm, God can use for good. We may also share this story with young people who have big dreams. Joseph had dreams at a young age, but they didn't come true right away. His story is a reminder that God's timing is different from ours, and delays don't mean denial. This story might even be shared with leaders and those in power. Joseph was a wise leader who used his position to help others. His story shows that leadership is about serving, not just ruling, and that God gives wisdom to those who seek him. Or we may share the story with families struggling with conflict. Joseph's family was full of jealousy, favoritism, and betrayal, yet in the end, God brought reconciliation. Families going through brokenness could see hope in how God restored Joseph's family. People wondering God has a plan in their lives may find many aspects of the story to help them. If someone feels lost or like their life has taken unexpected turns, Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that God is always in control, even when things seem unfair. As we close in this summation of the story of Joseph and his brothers, you might ask yourself, a couple of this writer's takeaways from the story of Joseph and his brothers include, what some intended for evil, God intends for good, and God uses everything in our lives and will turn it to good. Now, who would you tell this story to?